strong enough in the cybersecurity space, or what we call cyber resilient. They have the capability to prevent, to deter, and actually also recover from this kind of cyber threats. So this means that, as organizations get to digitally, to make use of digital technologies, they need to also make sure that they are keeping themselves abreast with the technologies available, so that they can make sure that they know what are those emerging trends. But of all the things, make sure that technology, in as much as it's being used to positively impact the business, let it not lead to harm in some sort of way. And this harm can really come from different, or be viewed in different ways. One way could be financial loss, could be reputational harm, could be loss of intellectual property, or maybe lead to something that will then impact production in the organization. So we must keep ourselves, secure from these kinds of breaches, and this means focusing on the two areas of the leaks or the breaches. 70% of the time, it's always the outsiders who can actually make sure that they have access to your data, the data that you see as secure and confidential. But 30% of the time, we actually have your own internal actors either not being well skilled enough, or probably being part of the leak, as opposed to a hack or a breach of the intellectual property or data. Yeah.
So what does it take to prepare, so that when that time comes, your staff are ready, or you just block these leaks that come into the organization?
First and foremost, it's awareness. So just as has been said, we talk of the bad and the good actors. So we have those that are actually always having it as an intention to hack or access secure or confidential data that belongs to an organization. With that in place, it then means that yourself or the organization that you run, you must then make sure that you've got the right skills. And these right skills will be in terms of the people that have got the skills, that understand what is really happening in the IT space, in terms of what has happened before and has been resolved, because there is a lot of historical data that can be used on that front, but also what is happening in terms of emerging trends. So you must have that skill, which should be in-house, and that skill, whenever it's available in-house, they will always get to know what technologies are available, because we've got technologies that we can use in terms of cybersecurity frameworks that you can actually use, so that you can be tracking what is happening out there in terms of cyber threats. These frameworks can also help you in terms of giving you the recommendation on the tools that you need to use, so that you can identify if at all a leak or a breach occurs. And ultimately, if at all a breach or a leak occurs, then these technologies also help you to recover from these leaks.
Right.
And this can only happen if at all there is awareness. But ultimately, cybersecurity should never be viewed as the responsibility of the IT department or this technical team in the organization. There needs to be a cybersecurity awareness or culture within the entire organization. The organization where I work, which is Africa Data Centers, we make sure that right from the executive or the senior leadership team, we go through training, and we have to remind ourselves of what is happening in the digital space that we should be aware of.
I like that you mentioned that it starts from the executive level. When you look at decisions around cybersecurity, there has to be investment into it. Do you think that the corporate leadership is taking up its role in ensuring that they understand the role of cybersecurity and how it impacts the business, and also investing in it?
The best way, or rather the best approach at making sure that the business understands the need, that the reason why they should invest on cybersecurity, is when you demonstrate what the financial loss is in case of a cybersecurity breach. So in terms of, I think it's Accenture's reports, they actually indicate that by 2025, we'll be losing to the tune of $10.2 trillion on cybersecurity in terms of financial losses attributed to cybersecurity breaches. Now, when you look at that financial loss and the fact that on average, any cybersecurity or phishing breach costs an organization probably $1.85 million. So when you look at it from that perspective, that if at all I don't invest to deter, prevent, and actually have a way to recover, if I don't secure the organization from this, then this is actually what I'm going to lose. And look at that loss in terms of financial value, which is extremely high. Look at it in terms of brand and brand reputation or reputational harm. Look at it in terms of legal costs that you will probably have to run into. Look at it in terms of what you have to do to make sure that going forward you prevent those kinds of harms again from happening or affecting your organization. So we must make sure that, as opposed to being reactive, any organization, and this is why the senior leadership has to really take ownership of this, we must make sure that we are charting the course in terms of owning it, and by way of being proactive as opposed to being reactive. There is no room for us to be reactive in the cyberspace. If you take a reactive approach, then that will end up being very costly as opposed to the proactive approach.
Right.
Yeah.
When you talk about 1 million, or it could be more, we don't know the numbers for this year, the threats that there are, of course it means that every day people are being threatened in the cyberspace. So for organizations that maybe have not invested in cybersecurity, what would you tell them?
In the cyberspace, we say no one is actually 100% secure. So it's never about the technology and the skills that you've got, but it's just a matter of time. And that is how comes we say you must continuously be, learning what is happening out there. And so, by way of example, you are a financial institution or a banking institution in Kenya, then you must ask yourself, how exactly are you securing your customer confidential data? How are you making sure that when they are making use of the digital access to your services, that they cannot have any breach? So you must make sure that that information is secure enough. You are a medical institution or a hospital for that matter. You've got confidential patient data. As an organization, you've got your own billing data. As an organization, you've got your own sort of medical research data that you're probably using based on the discipline that you see as a strength for your organization, and you don't want competition to get a hold of that. So there's a lot that happens, and confidential data differs from one organization to the other, but ultimately we must always make sure that we can ask ourselves, how can we make sure that we are continuously aware and we can proactively secure breaches or access to this kind of data. But as I said from the onset, it's at times never a hack or a breach, but can be an information leak. So you must also make sure that the employees that you have, do they have that moral high ground to understand that really as an organization, it's not really the act, but really it's not really the end result of the data going out there, but if at all the outcome of whatever I do leads to the information that is critical being handled or being accessed by a third party, then that will be wrong for the organization that I work for. I am an ambassador to the organization I work for, so I should really make sure that I'm part of the team and part of the system that secures these organizations' confidential data.
Right.
Yeah.
Cyber criminals, of course, are getting more sophisticated even as technology continues to just evolve. When you look at these breaches, you said yourself that no one is 100% secure.
No.
When that happens, when the threat is actualized by the cyber criminal, what is an organization to do, and how do you recover from that?
So the first and foremost thing is to ask yourself whether there's a legal process on there's a legal procedure that you need to adhere to, because you do not want to to sort of worsen the situation by way of not having followed the legal requirements. So let's say there's a legal framework in place. A legal framework will always define whether, number one, what is that private and confidential data, because not everything can be classified as confidential. But then number two, a legal framework will also define do you need to disclose, and who do you need to disclose this to? So there's what we call responsible disclosure. If I am a banking institution or if I am a hospital and I've actually undergone a breach, then the other thing I need to ask myself based on the legal requirements at times is that legal responsible disclosure. And responsible disclosure means, number one, owning up, because it doesn't help if that you have suffered a breach and you're not hiding it. In fact, what happens at times is any organization, when they suffer a breach, it might end up being public knowledge while you haven't made a formal statement around it. So it's always very important that you make sure that you undergo your own internal process, so that there is responsible disclosure, of course within your own communications framework, so that you make it known to the customers that yes, you still have everything under control. So that disclosure will then happen. But then what should then follow is as an assessment by your technical team. To what extent has this breach affected the organization? Could it be that this breach only touches on certain data assets and hasn't reached some other data assets. And in which case, if that happens, then you need to isolate what hasn't been impacted so that you avoid or prevent an extended breach or access to the rest of the organization's data. Last but not least is to see how to recover from it. So we've got tools that will then allow you, to recover from that actual data breach. That could mean, at times you've got ransomware, at times you've actually had identity theft, so an account has actually been taken up. In Kenya we have a live example, I think about a month or so ago, when a local academic institution or higher institution of learning had its social media page taken up by an external party, and they did everything possible to make sure that they recovered that and took ownership of it. So that is now the technical process to make sure that you can then use the various tools available so that you can take ownership or resolve that breach. But ultimately, every organization must always ask themselves, and that this is a responsibility that is owned by the leadership team for each and every organization, because we believe in that principle that it's not about us not getting hit, but when will we get hit? So we must ask ourselves, what are we then doing based on what has happened? Do we have some learnings from this? And for whatever learnings that we have, how are we preventing a recurrence of the same? And if at all beyond the recurrence, do we have something that is close to this that could also happen and affect the organization? So that whole process of doing what you will call maybe a postmortem of the entire incident, and making sure that the outcome of it is deterrence, and making sure that people are then more empowered to prevent happens or is in place.
Right. When you talk about the data space, how do you ensure business continuity?
Business continuity should, I will say in the present day, business continuity is something that has to happen by default. The reason I say this is business continuity, just like the term goes, it defines whether you want that business to be in existence for the long term, or you want the business to be in place for a short term. And I think COVID was a very good example as to why business continuity is something that we must have in place. Because business continuity is what made organizations during this COVID situation really reconsider ways of making sure that they can still be in business and be in touch with their customers, have their employees accessing the organization or offering the services that they still do, rethink of their business model and maybe come up with newer products and services in the market. All this forms part of business continuity. But on the digital space, if I was just to maybe focus on that, go to any organization that's making use of IT as it is at the moment. They must always ask themselves, so what happens if I am not going to access the primary source of the IT service that is supporting the organization? In which case, if that doesn't, if you aren't able to access the primary location, then you must ask yourself whether you've got a secondary location, and do you have access to that secondary location? So as we are Africa Data Centers, for the customers that we do have, be it the banking service providers, what we do is to support them so that they can have a business continuity plan and as alternate or disaster recovery location by way of bringing the IT infrastructure to be in our environment. So the over 50% banking institutions we have in Kenya, they see us as that good operator that can give them the same kind of security, availability, and reliable service that they have in their own spaces running from our environment. And that helps them in terms of business continuity by way of having a disaster recovery or an alternate site for their IT services.
Right. Let's talk about individuals.
Yes.
Of course, now people are on social media, you're online, you're purchasing things online as well. So there's a lot of data that is personal, but it is online.
Yes.
How do you ensure that you protect your data?
As an individual, first and foremost, again, I always say whatever we do as individuals actually cascades to what we do in the organizations. So as an individual, you must also then ask yourself, do you have what you see as very confidential and very, of higher value in whatever way to yourself? And whatever is of higher value or is very confidential to you, what happens? You must always then ask yourself, how have you stored it? We've got our mobile phones and we've got mobile devices that we are using to access digital services. You'll find people having access passwords that they put in place. You'll find people going a level ahead and having multiple factor authentication, having a way that beyond the password, which I have to memorize, can I maybe also add on top of it a biometric layer to make sure that there is authentication that it's the right person accessing it. If at all this device gets lost, do I have a way that the content that is in it, which is very critical to me, how do I secure it from access by a third party? And ultimately, can I recover it back? Identity theft is key, is critical, so let's also be aware of it. But closely related to it, and in our age of social media, social engineering is something that is really happening on a day-to-day basis. Social engineering just means one, getting to know what exactly Dan or Betty does, and what can I do so that I can make sure that when I am communicating with him or her, he can see me as that legitimate source of the information that I'm sharing with them. And ultimately, when I do that either through an email or through a social media post or through a text message that has a hyperlink, you'll be clicking it with the assumption that this is coming from a trusted source. When you do that, it helps me probably access data on your phone or on your mobile device, or it helps me probably steal your identity, or it helps me then steal your data and hold it at ransom, asking you to make a payment so that I can then release it back to you, which at times never happens. What they then do is to just, once you've made the initial payment, they then ask you, they then make an assessment as to how much you value this information, and in which case then they'll just be telling you, we've actually just rethought of what we were talking about, and we need twice the payment before we can give you this data. So that awareness also has to happen, and thanks to what you are doing, because we need to evangelize and make sure that let's make use of technology. Let's not fear it, because the other thing I'm also really seeing in our space is the fear for technology. So I've seen those that have also sort of lost touch and discarded mobile devices that are regarded as smart and gone back to the Kenyan kabambe or whatever thing, because they feel that is safe. But I think that is the wrong approach. You would rather make use of the smart device, but of course have that have that awareness that you need, so that you can make use of it in a way that is going to be beneficial to you and not expose you to any kind of harm. What would be your rallying call to industry players? We must make sure that we are resilient amidst turbulence. Right after COVID, we are still seeing turbulences in various forms and shapes. In Kenya, we are talking energy price becoming something that is of concern to organizations like ourselves. The escalations on foreign exchange is something that is of concern to us. So we must make sure that ultimately, let's think long term. So that long-term orientation of our businesses, I think at the moment is something that we must sort of push far much higher in terms of our priorities, because it's going to be the differentiator between what Kenya does versus the rest of the countries in the African continent. And yes, we are known to be good in marathons, so I want to believe that really we've got that gene and the DNA to make sure that our organizations have that long-term impact to serve the digital economy in the African continent.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I think that's a great way to end the conversation.
Thanks a lot, Betty.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
I have been speaking with Dan Kwach, the Managing Director of the Africa Data Centers in charge of the East Africa region. We have talked about cybersecurity, what companies need to do to ensure that they are safe, and what you also need to do to ensure that you are staying safe in the cyberspace. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Betty Kiptum. Enjoy the rest of your viewing. Bye-bye.